What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to teach you exactly how fast or slow you should be dieting for fat loss. Hit the like button if you enjoy this video or any of my videos, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get notified every time we drop a new video. Today I'm going to be covering how fast or slow you should be trying to lose fat. There are some specific rates of fat loss that we should be aiming for per week or given a certain period of time, be that 8, 12, 16 weeks, let's say. But there's also a lot of arguments in the industry of whether we should be chasing an aggressive calorie deficit to lose fat faster, or if we should be more conservative with our calorie deficit and lose fat slower. I think there's pros and cons of each. So today I'm going to bring up a specific study that is actually a little bit differing of opinion than what most people suggest, and explain why I think that's the case, as well as why that might not always be the case for every individual. Ultimately leaving you with exactly what you should do with your diet and how fast you should be losing fat. When we consider the rate of fat loss that we should be accomplishing, most of the time the general advice, which is based on most evidence and research, is losing about 0.5 to 1% of total body weight per week. What that means is that if you are 200 pounds and you are looking to lose weight, you can assume that you should be losing about 1 to 2 pounds per week until you reach your goal, and that is a healthy and sustainable rate of loss. As you lose weight, that percentage stays the same, but the amount you lose per week obviously drops, because somebody who is 150 pounds has less weight to lose per week when it's still 0.5 to 1%. And that is a good recommendation. However, there are certain times where we need to consistently stay on the slower end of weight loss, and there's some times where we might be able to push it a little bit faster to get you a result a little bit quicker. So what I want to review today is a specific study that compared the two. They compared a severe calorie deficit versus a moderate calorie deficit, which is another way of saying we're going to push this aggressively and go fast with fat loss, or we're going to be conservative and go really slow and take our time. And there was two groups in the study. One group followed a moderate calorie deficit for 12 months straight, which is really cool because 12 months in any study is a really long time. The fact that they were able to diet these individuals for 12 months straight while tracking their progress gives us a lot more info and data than the typical 6, 8, or maybe 10-week study. A lot of times anything more than 10 weeks is rare in research. But again, group 1, 12 months, moderate calorie deficit, so conservative, slow approach. Group 2 followed an aggressive approach. They had what was considered a severe calorie deficit, and they followed that for 4 months and then shifted to a moderate calorie deficit for 8 months, still being followed in dieting for 12 months straight. However, the difference was that they picked the pace up at the beginning and they started with a much more aggressive approach right out the gate, and then they tapered off and slowed down for the progression of the rest of the study in the 12-month period. The cool thing about this study is that they looked at the participants afterwards, and they actually looked to see who lost more fat, who lost more weight, who lost more lean body mass. Now, lean body mass is not just muscle. A lot of times people see LBM, lean body mass, and they think that this means you lose a bunch of muscle. Lean body mass is a muscle is a part of lean body mass. However, it's not just what lean body mass is. This is bone, tissue, organ, water, like everything. Everything but fat mass is technically lean body mass to an extent. So they looked at that, and they also looked at hand grip strength, which is a really good indicator of neurological fatigue and actual strength. Because if you go through a diet and you lose strength during the diet, your grip is going to be one of the easiest ways to safely test your strength capabilities. The fact that they tested that was great. What they found in the end of this research study, the conclusion was that the group that followed a severe calorie deficit for the first 4 months did not see any significant changes or differences in lean body mass or grip strength at the end of the 12-month period, which means going aggressively in the beginning, but then tapering off and following that period of time with a moderate approach allowed for enough recovery that they didn't suffer from muscle loss at all or a lack of strength after the study, which is really cool because they lost twice as much body fat. So there was a twofold greater weight loss difference, which means the group that was more severe and aggressive at the beginning actually lost more body fat, but did not lose more muscle or lean body mass or strength throughout the study. Now, obviously, this is a huge win for aggressive approaches, but I think we have to also understand that the aggressive approach also has to be followed with a diligently monitored, moderate or less aggressive approach, meaning either a reverse diet, a recovery phase, or just less aggressive deficit after the aggressive deficit. And the reason I say that is because if you go too hard out the gate and you follow a crash diet and you just call it quits right afterwards, you're very likely to not only lose lean body mass, but not regain the lean body mass and potentially gain fat. Because my assumption is that they may have lost more muscle tissue in the short period, but going to a more moderate approach after the aggressive period allowed them to regain that tissue. Because regaining muscle tissue after a diet is extremely easy, especially since most of the tissue loss is going to be glycogen, and muscle memory will refill those glycogen stores as you train and fill back up with calories. So I'm not surprised by this. But again, there's also a lot of research on the contrary that shows a slow and steady approach is going to be better for muscle maintenance and for psychological adherence and your ability to stay consistent with the diet, which is much more of a personal preference aspect. But nonetheless, we can't say that this one study is indefinitely saying that faster fat loss is better. But it does paint a good picture that it could be a potential good route, one that most people don't agree with or think is. There's also some caveats to this study. So I don't want to paint this beautiful picture and make it seem like fast fat loss is the way to go. There is some potential downsides of going faster with your approach at the beginning. The obvious one is adherence. If somebody doesn't have the willpower, the discipline, or the routine to be able to follow a more rigid or restrictive or aggressive approach, then obviously they're not going to be able to follow it. And although you can have a flexible diet and still accomplish an aggressive deficit, it's more of something that sounds great in theory, but it's very difficult to be highly flexible with your diet if you don't have many calories to use because you're on an aggressive approach. So the adherence of this is something we definitely need to be aware of and potentially implement refeeds or diet breaks or free meals along the way to make sure that you can adhere to that. The other thing is that there was some potential bone mineral loss, specifically in the hip of the individuals following this study. The thing that we want to throw out as what could be looked at as a negative of the study is that the study was also done on postmenopausal women who were between the ages of 45 to 65. So some people will say, well, how does that apply to me? Maybe I'm a 20-year-old male or I'm a 30-year-old female. I'm premenopausal. I'm never going to experience menopause, whatever it may be. They are human beings. They have a metabolism and they are in a calorie deficit. That's how it applies to you. So fat loss is fat loss first and foremost. Second of all, somebody who is of older age and is going through something like menopause is actually more likely to suffer from lean body mass loss during a deficit and periods of stressful times, which would be in a deficit or on a diet. So the fact that they didn't lose strength is actually a huge sign that somebody who is not yet in that period of time is actually even less likely to lose muscle, because if they didn't, then a younger individual or somebody who is not going to experience menopause, which would be a male who also has higher levels of testosterone, which is also going to help maintain muscle, is even less likely to lose muscle tissue in a diet, which just again goes to show that it's not as likely as people think to lose muscle tissue while dieting. That's a big point I want to paint there. But the reason I bring up their age and the situation they're in for the study is that we also have to consider that the bone mineral loss might have been because they are of that age or going through postmenopausal situations in their life. So it might not be applicable in that regard. Not everybody's gonna suffer from bone mineral loss if they follow an aggressive approach, and some of that can actually be mitigated by taking the right supplementation or implementing the right type of foods into your diet. Based on my over a decade of experience coaching and trying to look into as much research on fat loss as possible, because that's what I like to think I'm an expert in and coaching people with, I do have 5 specific things I would like to share with you today that I think are the main takeaway points that we need to consider and what would factor into your decision if you are going to approach fat loss from a more fast, aggressive approach with your calorie deficit or more of a conservative, slow approach with your calorie deficit. The first thing is personal preference. Anytime we are working a client through a diet or you're working yourself through a diet, we have to understand that your personal preference comes into play. Are you somebody who likes to jump all in, have a super specific routine and just get after it? Are you somebody who needs that immediate response and feedback and result to be motivated? Or are you somebody who can be patient, who wants to focus on long term, who wants an easier path, who doesn't want to be as aggressive? Your personal preference is going to dictate your level of motivation and your ability to adhere to the diet consistently. Those are the 2 biggest things. That is the one major thing that we have to consider before choosing any type of dietary approach to lose fat. There's plenty of research on intrinsic motivation. This is like that internal drive to accomplish a result. And the reality is a faster result tends to increase that level of intrinsic motivation. So regardless of your personality type, I do believe there is a value in approaching an aggressive approach at the beginning, because fast results and immediate feedback and immediate reward is very, very likely to lead to better success, because you are going to be highly motivated when you see yourself immediately improving versus working on something week after week after week and not seeing results and just crossing your fingers and knowing that it'll work eventually, or it's so slow and you see yourself every single day in the mirror, which I know a lot of you can relate to, that you don't even notice the results happening. Whereas if you take an aggressive approach, yeah, it's more difficult, but it's difficult and that's a signal in and of itself that this is working and I'm in a deficit. And when I see the results in the mirror, I am more motivated to stick to that So if I can get quick results out of somebody and then taper off to be more sustainable afterwards, 9 times out of 10, that's gonna be a good way to go. Number 3, you have to read the entire study. And this goes for everything. There's a lot of times where people read the title, they read the abstract. What I do when I look at research is, number 1, I do read the title, of course, I do read the abstract, and then I pick it apart and I try to look through what the interpretations were. Then I go try to find somebody else who is a researcher who has also reviewed the study and interpreted it themselves, so I can get a better understanding of how they looked at it. And the reason I say that is because if you look into the details of this study, the moderate deficit group followed a 25 to 35% calorie deficit. The severe calorie group followed a 65 to 75% deficit. I've talked to a lot of people, and to them, 35% is a severe deficit. And the reason I point this out is because a lot of times people underestimate what their true maintenance should be and overestimate how many calories they actually pull out of the diet, when in reality they need to pull more in order to accomplish an aggressive approach. And what this tells us is that no matter what, we need to approach the calorie deficit from a point of enough substance to get out of maintenance. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people think a moderate or a conservative approach is taking a 5 to 10% chunk out of your calories and hoping for weight loss. But the reality is that's an adjustment you make months down the road. Your initial deficit needs to be significant enough to cause results. And sometimes that means taking out 25, 35, 45, 50% of your calories to see some serious progress. Now, I will also add that we don't know if these individuals had built their metabolism up, if they had a lot of muscle, if they were resistance training a lot. Those things do come into play. And when they come into play, it means that protein might not need to be as high. If protein doesn't need to be as high, we also won't have as many calories coming in the diet on maintenance. We may need to actually pull more calories, so on and so forth. Point being, there's always a lot of nuance to this. And that's my really big takeaway as a coach is when you read studies and you apply research to actual client case studies or diets, we have to understand that there is always a numerous amount of nuances, things that may seem like they're splitting hairs, or just things that you say, it depends, because it's never black and white. And that's the thing I want you to take away from this bullet point, is that there's always more to it, and you have to search for what is always more to it before prescribing a diet to somebody. Number 4, I already kind of alluded to, but I'm gonna say it again because it's really, really important. There is no one size fits all. A moderate or conservative deficit can be a wide variety of things. So can a severe diet. There's not one good training program, one good supplementation, one good nutrition plan, one specific type of macro ratio. There's nothing that is one size fits all. Everybody is different. Everybody is a special little snowflake, and you need a special little diet for you. So just know that just because one study says one thing doesn't mean it's the end all be all. Take some things from it, implement it, see if it works, and keep running with it if it does. If it doesn't, don't stress, because again, you are a special little snowflake. Number 5, you need to have some kind of metric or trackability to know that you're actually in a deficit. And I think that's a big takeaway here, especially when I consider the 25 to 35%, 65 to 75%, all these numbers. You need to be tracking biofeedback. Track your macros, track your weight, track your sleep, your stress, your hunger, your cravings. All these things is what we do in our coaching. We do these things to ensure that the client is in a deficit. Sometimes the negative symptoms you feel from a diet, like being hungry, having less energy, the stress of not sleeping as much, or whatever it may be, yes, we can mitigate those things. We try to manage those things well. We implement diet breaks. But when those signals come along, it tells us we're in a deficit. And if we're never getting any of those at all ever, we might not be stressing the system enough to actually lose fat. And although this stress feels stressful at the time, it's a good stress because it leads to fat loss, which leads to the body that you're after and the health that you're trying to achieve. So it's really important to understand you need to track these metrics, and we need to be able to create a deficit that gets us out of our maintenance range. That maintenance range is where we sit and maintain our weight. It's not one number. If your maintenance calorie intake based on a calculator is 2,500, it's probably somewhere between 2,250 and 2,750. It's never a single dot because every day of life is different, and therefore it's floating, which means we have to take a big enough chunk out of our calories to get out of that range and start making meaningful progress. And I think what this study displayed to us is that 1, we're not gonna lose muscle by dieting too fast. 2, if we do decide to diet faster, we might see better results at the beginning, which motivates us to keep going, but we have to taper off. We can't just consistently follow that severe deficit forever, because that's when muscle loss, poor health, hormonal issues, things like that start to arise and happen. And last but not least, if we're not tracking metrics to individualize the process, we are going to have a really tough time consistently seeing results and being able to adjust the diet to keep seeing those results as time goes on. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thank you for watching the video. If you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so I can make sure you get updated every time we drop a new video. If you have any questions, comments about the video, about what I talked about, drop a comment below. I would love to chat with you and answer any of your questions, and I will catch you guys next time.